The emergency dispatch center received the call at exactly 11:45 in the morning on Christmas Day. The dispatcher heard a woman's voice on the line, her voice shaking and panicked and desperate with the kind of fear that only a parent can truly experience when their child is in danger or missing. The woman's name was Jennifer Williams. Her son was missing. Her son was only 6 years old. His name was David Michael Williams. He had wandered away from their home during the chaos and excitement and joy of Christmas morning while Jennifer was helping her other children open their presents, helping them with the colorful wrapping paper and ribbons and boxes filled with gifts. She had turned her back for just a moment to help her daughter unwrap a doll. Just one moment of distraction. And when she turned back around, her son was gone from the living room where he had been sitting just moments before. The back door to the house was open. He had gone outside into the cold December morning, wearing only his pajamas and his slippers. No coat, no hat, no protection from the biting cold that would kill him if left exposed too long. Nobody had seen him for nearly 30 minutes or perhaps more. Jennifer could not remember exactly how long it had been. Her mind was racing with panic and fear and desperation. Her heart was pounding in her chest like a drum beating out the rhythm of her terror. She could barely think clearly enough to answer the dispatcher's questions about her missing son, about where he might have gone, about what he might have been wearing. Jennifer's hands were shaking uncontrollably with fear. She could barely hold the phone to her ear. She was experiencing the worst fear that any parent could experience, the devastating fear of not knowing where their child was, the paralyzing fear of not knowing if their child was safe and warm, the absolute terror of not knowing if they would ever see their child again alive. The dispatcher immediately began asking detailed questions to fully understand the situation, asking about David, asking about his appearance and age and size, asking about what he was wearing when he left home into the cold December morning. How long had he been missing exactly? What was he wearing at this exact moment? Which direction might he have gone when he left the house? Were there any nearby bodies of water that could be dangerous to a small child? Were there any dangerous areas in the neighborhood that posed threats? Were there any places where a 6-year-old child might naturally go because he was interested in something like snow or animals or water? Jennifer answered the questions as best she could while her voice continued to shake with terror and panic and the desperate fear that comes from not knowing where your child is, from knowing that a small child alone in cold December weather could be in serious danger, could be lost and confused, could be hurt and injured, could be freezing in the cold without any protection from the elements that could kill him in mere minutes. Jennifer provided detailed descriptions of her son's appearance and his clothing. She described what he was wearing when he disappeared from the house. She described his personality and interests and favorite things. She answered every question the dispatcher asked, trying desperately to provide any information that might help find her son alive and safe and warm. The dispatcher alerted all available units in the area immediately upon hearing the information about the missing child on Christmas morning, and police cars were dispatched with urgency. Within minutes, police cars were heading toward the Williams family home with sirens blaring and lights flashing, and emergency responders focused on the mission. Within minutes, patrol officers were driving quickly through the neighborhoods looking for a 6-year-old boy in pajamas on Christmas morning looking for any sign of the child. Within minutes, the search had begun in earnest with urgency and determination and commitment to finding the child. But everyone who received the call and everyone who understood the situation knew that time was critical and precious and running out, that every moment that passed was a moment in which danger increased exponentially, that hypothermia was a real and serious threat to a small child exposed to the cold temperatures. A 6-year-old child alone in cold December weather was in immediate danger from hypothermia, which could kill him quickly, from falling and getting injured, from getting lost in the neighborhood and becoming more lost with each passing moment, from wandering into danger without understanding the risks, from encountering strangers or other dangers. The Christmas morning that had started with joy and celebration and family togetherness had turned into a nightmare of fear and uncertainty and desperation and urgency. Officer Michael Torres was one of the first officers to arrive at the Williams family home, and he understood the gravity of the situation immediately. He was a 10-year veteran of the police force, and he had 3 children of his own at home waiting for him on Christmas morning. He understood immediately the terror that Jennifer was experiencing because he was a father, and he could imagine the horror and fear she was feeling. He understood that a missing child on Christmas morning was every parent's worst nightmare, was a scenario that haunted parents in their moments of deepest fear, was something that nobody wanted to imagine happening to their own family and loved ones. He understood the urgency of the situation and the critical nature of time, and he knew that every minute mattered in finding David before the cold claimed him. He began to organize the search effort systematically and carefully and methodically with strategy and purpose. He brought out maps of the neighborhood so he could see the geography and plan the search routes. He identified the areas that needed to be searched first based on logical patterns of how children moved and where they might be attracted to go. He began to think like a 6-year-old child, trying to figure out where David might have gone and why. What would be interesting to a 6-year-old child on a snowy Christmas morning? What might attract him or frighten him, where a child of that age might naturally wander to in search of adventure and excitement and new experiences. Officer Torres knew that to find David, he had to think like David and understand what would motivate a young child to wander away from home on Christmas morning. Jennifer explained to Officer Torres in detailed and emotional terms that David had been excited about Christmas morning since the night before when he went to bed thinking about snow and presents and Santa Claus. She explained that he had been eager to get outside and play in the snow that had fallen overnight, covering the neighborhood in white like a blanket of pristine snow. She explained that he had been talking incessantly about wanting to build a snowman in the backyard with her and with his siblings. She said that the last time she had seen him before he disappeared, he had been looking out the window at the snow that had fallen during the night, watching the snow with the fascination and wonder of a young child, and talking about the snowman he wanted to build, the snow angel he wanted to make in the pristine snow, the adventures he wanted to have in the winter morning before breakfast, and before the day really began in earnest. She described his excitement and his energy and his enthusiasm about Christmas and snow with emotion and tears streaming down her face. She described how happy he had been just moments before he disappeared from her sight forever, it seemed. Officer Torres began to search the neighborhood methodically and systematically and carefully thinking about where to look first. He walked through yards, looking behind houses and garages for any sign of a young boy in pajamas who might be lost or confused or hiding. He looked in bushes and trees and any place where a child might hide or go to explore and play in the snow. He called David's name repeatedly and loudly, hoping that the boy might hear him and respond from wherever he was hiding or lost or confused or cold. He put himself into the mind of a 6-year-old child who wanted to build a snowman and had wandered away from home seeking snow and adventure and excitement and exploration. He thought about where such a child might go, about what would draw a child of that age away from home and family on Christmas morning. He thought about what was within walking distance of the home for a small child with short legs. He thought about places that a small child might find interesting or attractive or worth exploring on a snowy Christmas morning when the world was covered in white. Officer Torres was determined to find David before the cold and the snow and the danger of hypothermia could harm the young boy. An hour passed with no sign of David anywhere in the immediate neighborhood surrounding the house, and the search began to expand outward. The search expanded significantly across multiple blocks of the residential area surrounding the Williams home, with more officers searching in wider circles. More officers arrived from nearby police departments to help with the search effort and coordinate the expanding search grid. A search dog and its handler arrived, ready to search for the scent of the lost child in the snow and wind and cold air that was making the search more difficult. Volunteers from the community began to arrive at the neighborhood and began to help with the search, spreading out in all directions looking for any sign of the missing boy who had disappeared on Christmas morning. The temperature was dropping steadily as the morning progressed toward noon, and the threat of cold increased with every passing minute. The forecast called for more snow and colder weather later that day, which would make the search even more difficult and dangerous. Everyone who was involved in the search understood that they were in a race against time, that every minute that passed was a minute in which David was getting colder and more endangered, was getting more lost, was becoming more endangered and hypothermic, was potentially moving further away from where he had started his journey into the snow. Jennifer stood in her house, and she looked out the windows repeatedly at the search that was happening in her neighborhood all around her home. She could see police cars parked at various locations on the streets around her home, creating a command center for the search. She could see officers walking through yards and knocking on doors, asking neighbors if anyone had seen her son David wandering in the snow. She could see the search dog working, searching for a scent, for any indication of where David had gone and which direction he had traveled away from the house into the cold morning. She could see volunteers searching in the snow with determination and purpose and commitment to finding the child before it was too late. And she could not do anything except stand there and wait and pray that her son would be found, that he would be found alive, that he would be found soon, that he would come home safely before something terrible happened to him in the cold and snow and dangerous December weather. She stood at the window, and she prayed with all her heart that her son would be found alive and safe and warm. She thought about the last time she had seen him sitting in the living room opening presents with joy and excitement. She thought about his face and his smile and his laughter. She thought about his laugh and his joy and his innocence. She thought about how much she loved him and how terrified she was that she might lose him forever to the cold and the snow and the dangerous December morning that had started with such joy. 2 hours had passed since David had gone missing from the house, and the search intensified with growing urgency. The search had expanded to several blocks around the family home, spreading out in all directions in a systematic grid pattern designed to cover all possible areas where a child might wander. The search dog had picked up a scent at one point and had led the officers in a particular direction into the neighborhood, but the scent had dissipated quickly in the cold wind, and the dog had been unable to establish a clear trail that went further into the neighborhood away from the home. There was no sign of David anywhere in the places they had searched thoroughly. There was no indication of where he had gone or which direction he might have traveled away from home into the snow. There was only the growing fear that David might have gotten lost, might have wandered too far, might have gone somewhere that the search teams had not yet looked or searched, might be in a place that no one had thought to search yet, might be hidden away somewhere where rescuers could not find him in time before the cold took him away from them forever. The fear and desperation grew with each passing minute as the search continued without success or positive results or any sign of the missing child who had disappeared into the snow. Officer Torres began to expand his thinking about where David might be and where a young child might wander to and what would attract a child on a snowy morning. He began to consider places further from the home than he had originally thought possible for a 6-year-old to walk. He began to consider that David might have wandered much farther than anyone had expected or anticipated given his age and size. He began to look at the map of the neighborhood, and he began to think strategically about what would happen if a 6-year-old child just kept walking, kept moving forward without a destination or purpose, just following his curiosity about the snow and the winter landscape and new places he had not explored before. Where would he end up if he just kept walking in one direction? What would he encounter along the way? What places might attract a child seeking adventure in the snow on Christmas morning? Officer Torres began to think creatively and strategically about the problem and the best way to find David before time ran out. He thought about water features like ponds and streams that might attract a curious child. He thought about open spaces and parks where a child might go to play. He thought about places that would appeal to a child's sense of wonder and adventure and exploration on a snowy winter morning. And then Officer Torres had a thought that seemed important and worth pursuing immediately before it was too late and time ran out completely. There was a small park about 6 blocks from the family home in the neighborhood. It was a park with a frozen pond in the middle of it, surrounded by trees and open space. The pond was not very large and not very deep, but it was a body of water, and it was something that might attract a child, something that might draw a child's attention and curiosity and sense of wonder about ice and snow. It was something a child might want to see or explore, something that might hold the attention of a young boy interested in nature and water and outdoor adventure and new experiences and playing in snow on Christmas morning. Officer Torres decided that he needed to go to the park and search there immediately before time ran out and before something terrible happened to David in the cold. He got into his car and drove to the park with urgency in his heart and a prayer on his lips that he would find David alive. He arrived at the park and he began to walk around the pond systematically looking for the child and calling his name. He called David's name repeatedly, looking for any response or any sign. He looked for any sign of a small child in the snow around the pond. He looked for footprints in the snow that might indicate that a child had been in this area recently. He looked for any disturbance of the snow that might indicate that someone had passed through recently. He looked for anything that might indicate the presence of a small child who had wandered to this place. And then he saw something that made his heart stop beating normally and his breath catch in his throat. He saw a small dark shape on the ice of the pond in the middle of the frozen surface. He saw what looked like a person lying on the frozen surface of the pond, not moving. He saw what appeared to be a human form on the ice in the distance. Officer Torres's heart began to race with a mixture of hope and terror and fear. He prayed it was David. He prayed the child was alive and not dead from the cold. Officer Torres ran toward the pond as fast as he could move without losing his balance on the snowy ground around the frozen water. He ran with the understanding that time was critical and every second mattered now more than ever, that if a child was on the ice, that child was in extreme danger, that the child needed immediate help to survive and be rescued from the cold. As he got closer to the pond, he could see that it was indeed a small figure, a small boy, lying on the ice motionless. The boy was not moving at all, not even slightly. The officer slowed as he approached the ice, aware that the ice might not support his full weight, aware that he might fall through the ice if he was not careful and cautious, aware that he needed to be cautious even as he moved as quickly as possible to save the child. He stepped carefully onto the ice, testing each step before putting his full weight on it, moving slowly toward the small figure lying on the frozen surface, maintaining his balance carefully, trying not to slip on the frozen surface that could give way at any moment. David was lying on the ice, completely unconscious and unresponsive to Officer Torres, who was checking for signs of life. He was not moving at all, not even slightly, or breathing visibly. His pajamas were soaked with water and ice, making them heavy and cold. His lips were blue from the severe cold exposure. His skin was pale and colorless from prolonged cold exposure and hypothermia. He was not responsive when Officer Torres touched him gently and checked for signs of life and warmth and breathing. But he was breathing very slowly and shallowly. His heart was still beating, even though barely and weakly. Officer Torres immediately called for medical assistance on his police radio with urgency in his voice. He called for an ambulance to respond immediately. He called for backup and emergency services to come to the park. He called for emergency medical personnel to respond to the park immediately with equipment to treat hypothermia. He picked up David carefully and gently and carried him off the ice, trying not to slip on the frozen surface, trying not to fall and hurt the child further, trying to get the boy to safety and warmth, trying to get him warm, trying to get him to medical help as quickly as possible before it was too late. Officer Torres moved with purpose and determination and urgency. He knew that time was of the essence and that David's life depended on getting him medical attention immediately and without any delay or hesitation. Jennifer received a call that David had been found alive, and her world changed in that single moment of relief and terror combined. She received a call that he was being taken to the hospital by ambulance with sirens and lights. She received a call that he was alive, that he was breathing, that paramedics were working desperately to keep him stable and warm and alive. Jennifer collapsed to her knees with a combination of overwhelming relief and continuing terror and the understanding that her son was alive but was still in serious danger, that he had nearly died on Christmas morning, that hypothermia was a serious threat and that his survival was not yet certain by any means, that he was not out of danger yet and might still die. She did not know if her son would survive the ordeal and the cold exposure. She did not know if there would be permanent damage from the cold and the hypothermia. She did not know what the outcome would be or if he would recover fully. All she knew in that moment was that her son had been found alive and he was being taken to the hospital for emergency treatment to save his life. The ambulance arrived at the hospital emergency entrance and David was brought into the emergency room on a stretcher. The medical team immediately began working on him frantically, began the process of saving his life with all their training and expertise. They began to warm him gradually and carefully, very carefully and cautiously and slowly, because warming someone with severe hypothermia too quickly could cause more damage to the body and could shock the system and cause cardiac arrest. They connected him to monitors to track his heart rate and blood pressure and oxygen levels constantly and watch for any changes. They assessed his condition carefully and thoroughly. They worked methodically to bring his body temperature back to normal gradually degree by degree, to restore circulation to his extremities, to bring him back from the edge of death that he had been approaching so dangerously close. David had been on the ice for over 2 hours in the freezing cold December weather. His body temperature had dropped to a critically low level that was near death. His heart rate was very slow and weak. His breathing was shallow and barely perceptible. But he was alive against all odds. Somehow, against all odds and medical expectations, in the freezing December cold, in the middle of a holiday morning, a 6-year-old boy had survived being lost and exposed to elements that should have killed him within an hour. He was a Christmas miracle fighting for his life in the hospital emergency room with dedicated medical professionals determined to save him and bring him back to health. As the medical team worked on David intensively, as they gradually warmed his body, carefully monitoring every vital sign, as they monitored his vital signs, constantly watching for improvements or deterioration, they began to see signs of improvement slowly, small signs that the body was beginning to respond to treatment and warming. His heart rate began to increase slightly from critically low to merely very low. His breathing became a bit stronger and more regular. His body temperature began to rise degree by degree slowly. Slowly and gradually, minute by minute and hour by hour, David's body began to respond to the medical treatment and intensive care. Slowly and gradually, he was being brought back to life by the dedication and expertise and skill of medical professionals who refused to give up on saving him. Hours passed in the hospital, with Jennifer waiting anxiously. Jennifer sat in the waiting room, unable to do anything except wait and pray and hope desperately that her son would survive this ordeal. She thought about the moment when she had turned her back to help her daughter. She thought about the moment when she realized he was gone from the room. She thought about the terror of the search and the fear of loss. She thought about how close she had come to losing her son forever to the cold on Christmas morning of all days. David began to wake up slowly from unconsciousness. His eyes opened slowly and with difficulty. He looked around the hospital room with confusion and fear and disorientation. His body was wrapped in warming blankets. He was connected to monitors and 4 lines and medical equipment. But he was awake and conscious. He was alive and breathing on his own. He was conscious and aware. The medical team immediately began to assess his mental status carefully and thoroughly. They wanted to make sure that he had not suffered any brain damage from the cold and the lack of oxygen during his ordeal. They wanted to ensure his brain had not been permanently injured from the hypothermia and exposure to extreme cold. They wanted to make sure that he was going to be all right and make a full recovery. Jennifer ran to David's bedside when she was allowed into the room. She held him carefully and gently. She cried tears of relief and gratitude and overwhelming emotion. She thanked God that her son was alive and safe. She thanked the police officers who had found him, especially Officer Torres. She thanked the paramedics who had transported him safely to the hospital. She thanked the medical team that had saved his life with their skill and dedication. She held her son gently, and she felt the overwhelming relief of a parent who had nearly lost everything that mattered and had been given a precious second chance to keep her child. The story of David's rescue became known throughout the community and beyond the local area, spreading far and wide. News organizations covered the story extensively on television and radio and newspapers. Local news ran features about Officer Torres who found David, about the medical team that saved his life, about community volunteers who helped search in the cold. The story spread quickly through the city and the region, and eventually across the country. People everywhere heard about a boy who had been lost on Christmas morning and had been found on the ice and had survived against all odds and expectations and medical probability. Officer Torres became known as a hero throughout his community and the surrounding areas. He had found the child at the critical moment before it was too late to save him. He had recognized where the child might be when others had not thought of the park. He had used intuition and training and experience to make the right decision. He had gotten to the child in time to save his life from the cold. Officer Torres received a commendation from the police department for his heroism and dedication. He was recognized publicly for his service and his heroism and his quick thinking that saved a life. The medical team at the hospital was also recognized for their work and expertise and dedication to saving David. Doctors and nurses who treated David carefully, who warmed his body gradually and safely, who monitored vital signs constantly throughout the night, were praised publicly for their expertise and dedication and skill in saving a child's life against the odds. They had saved a child's life on Christmas morning when many would have given up hope. They had given a family their son back alive and healthy and whole. David recovered from his ordeal over the following weeks and months with careful monitoring. He spent a full week in the hospital recovering and being monitored carefully by medical staff. Then he was finally released to go home with his family to continue his recovery at home with his mother and siblings. He had suffered no permanent brain damage from the cold exposure. He had suffered no permanent physical damage from the hypothermia. He had made a full and complete recovery beyond anyone's expectations. Against all odds and medical expectations, a 6-year-old boy who had been exposed to extreme cold for hours, who had been on the verge of death from hypothermia, who by all medical standards should not have survived the exposure, had survived and recovered completely without any lasting effects or permanent damage. Jennifer thought deeply about what could have happened if things had gone differently that Christmas morning. She thought about the moments after David wandered away from the house into the snow. She thought about what could have been if Officer Torres had not thought to search at the park with the pond. She thought about what could have been if the search had started even just a few minutes later than it did. She thought about what could have been if the ice had not held David's weight. She thought about how close she came to losing her son forever to the cold and the snow and the danger. She thought about the miraculous fact that her son survived the ordeal, that he was alive and healthy, that he was home with her on Christmas safely, that the family had been given a precious second chance to be together and celebrate. David grew up knowing and understanding that he had been given a second chance at life through the heroism of others. He grew up understanding that he had been saved by people who cared enough to search for him in the cold and to never give up until they found him. He grew up grateful for his life and for the people who had made his survival possible through their dedication and heroism. He grew up understanding the value of life and the importance of helping others in need and never giving up when someone needs help. Years later, when David was a teenager in high school, he reached out to Officer Torres, who had saved his life. David wanted to thank the officer personally for saving his life on that Christmas morning so many years ago. David wanted to tell him how much his rescue had mattered to him and his family. Officer Torres was deeply moved by the encounter with the young man David had become. He was moved to see that the child he had rescued from the ice had grown into a fine young man. He was moved to see that David understood what had happened and understood the miracle that had occurred on Christmas morning so many years ago in the park. David decided that when he grew up and finished school, he wanted to be a police officer just like Officer Torres, who had saved his life. David wanted to help people in danger. David wanted to save lives just as his life had been saved. David wanted to dedicate his life to serving others and protecting people and making a difference in his community. David understood that his life had been saved by someone who was dedicated to helping others, and he wanted to follow in that person's footsteps and carry on that tradition of service. Officer Torres encouraged David to pursue his dream of becoming a police officer and serving the community. Officer Torres mentored David through his high school years and college years, and through the police academy training. Officer Torres helped David understand what it meant to be a police officer, what it took to help people, what it meant to make a difference in someone's life when they were in danger. Officer Torres became not just the officer who had saved David's life on that Christmas morning, but also a mentor and a friend and a father figure who guided David toward his future career in service. On the anniversary of David's rescue, every single year on Christmas morning, the family gathered together to remember that terrifying day and celebrate the miracle. They remembered the terror of that morning when David disappeared. They remembered the desperate search through the neighborhood in the cold. They remembered the moment Officer Torres found David on the ice barely alive. They remembered the rescue and the rush to the hospital. They remembered the long hours of waiting to see if David would survive. They remembered the miracle of his recovery and survival against all odds. They gave thanks every year for the fact that David was alive and healthy. They gave thanks for Officer Torres, who never gave up searching. They gave thanks for the medical team who worked tirelessly to save him. They gave thanks for the community volunteers that helped search in the cold. They gave thanks for the miracle of Christmas morning that brought David back to them alive when they thought they had lost him forever to the cold and the snow. The story of David's rescue became part of the community's history and legacy that was passed down through generations. It became a story that parents told their children about the power of community coming together, about the importance of staying alert and keeping track of children, especially in dangerous weather, about the fact that miracles could happen even in the darkest moments, about the fact that people who were dedicated to helping others could make a real difference between life and death. The story became a reminder and a lesson that on Christmas morning, when families were gathered together celebrating and enjoying the holiday and opening presents, it was vitally important to remember that sometimes terrible things could happen unexpectedly, but that with the help of dedicated people who never give up, with the help of a strong community support system, with the power of love and determination and refusal to give up, miracles could happen and lives could be saved against all odds and expectations. Jennifer never forgot the lesson she learned that terrifying Christmas morning about vigilance and care. She never again took her eyes off her children when they were young. She became an advocate for child safety and awareness in her community. She spoke at schools and community centers about the importance of watching children carefully, especially during holidays when there are distractions. She shared her story openly and honestly about how one moment of distraction nearly cost her everything she held dear. She talked about the guilt she felt for turning away, even for a moment. She talked about the terror of not knowing where David was. She talked about the miracle of his rescue and recovery. She talked about the heroes who saved her son's life that day. David himself, as he grew older, began to share his story with others to help and inspire. He spoke at schools about safety and about listening to parents. He spoke about the importance of never wandering away from home, especially in dangerous weather. He spoke about his experience being lost in the cold, even though he was so young he barely remembered it himself. He spoke about waking up in the hospital and seeing his mother's tears of joy and relief. He spoke about meeting Officer Torres years later and thanking him for saving his life. He spoke about his decision to become a police officer himself and carry on the tradition of helping others that had saved his own life. When David graduated from the police academy years later as a young man, Officer Torres was there in the audience, watching with pride and emotion. Officer Torres had mentored David through every step of his journey from teenager to young man to police officer. He had guided him through the challenges and encouraged him through the difficulties. He had shared his wisdom and experience. He had helped shape David into the kind of officer who would care about people and never give up on finding someone who was lost or in danger. Officer Torres felt immense pride watching David take his oath to serve and protect, just as he himself had done decades earlier when he first became an officer. David's first assignment as a new police officer was in the same neighborhood where he had once been lost and rescued on that Christmas morning so many years before. He patrolled the same streets where Officer Torres had searched for him desperately. He walked past the park with the pond where he had been found lying on the ice near death. Every time he passed that park, he remembered his story, and he remembered his purpose. He remembered that he was alive because people had cared enough to search for him. He remembered that he had a duty to do the same for others who were lost or in danger or needed help. In his first year as a police officer, David himself rescued a lost child during a winter storm. The child had wandered away from home during a snowstorm, just as David himself had done years earlier. David thought immediately of the park with the pond, just as Officer Torres had done. David went to the park and found the child near the frozen pond, just beginning to wander onto the ice. David rescued the child before the child could get onto the dangerous ice. David brought the child home safely to grateful parents who had been terrified they had lost their son. David understood exactly how those parents felt because his own mother had felt that same terror. The cycle of heroism and rescue had come full circle from the day Officer Torres had saved David to the day David saved another child. Officer Torres heard about David's rescue of the lost child, and he felt overwhelming pride and emotion. The child he had saved had grown up to save another child in almost the exact same circumstances. The legacy of caring and heroism had been passed down and would continue. Officer Torres knew that David would save many more lives in his career as a police officer. Officer Torres knew that the decision he had made to search the park that Christmas morning years ago had not only saved David's life, but had created a new generation of heroism and service. Years continued to pass, and David continued his career as a dedicated police officer. He became known in his community, just as Officer Torres had been known as someone who cared deeply about people and never gave up when someone was in trouble. He rescued many more people over his career. He found many more lost children and brought them home safely. He helped many families in crisis. He made a difference in his community every single day through his dedication and service and refusal to give up on people who needed help. Officer Torres eventually retired from the police force after 40 years of service. David was there at his retirement ceremony to honor the man who had saved his life and mentored him and shaped him into the officer he had become. David spoke at the ceremony about Officer Torres and about the Christmas morning when Torres had saved his life. David talked about how that one act of heroism and dedication had changed the course of his entire life. David talked about how he had dedicated his own life to service because of Officer Torres's example. The audience at the retirement ceremony was moved to tears hearing the story of rescue and legacy and the cycle of heroism that had begun on that Christmas morning so many years ago. Jennifer attended Officer Torres's retirement ceremony with her entire family. She brought David and her other children and her grandchildren. She wanted them all to meet and thank the man who had saved David's life and given their family a second chance. She wanted her grandchildren to understand the importance of heroes and service and dedication. She wanted them to know the story of that Christmas morning and the miracle that had happened. She wanted them to understand that ordinary people doing their jobs with dedication and care could make extraordinary differences in the lives of others. At the retirement ceremony, Jennifer embraced Officer Torres with tears streaming down her face. She thanked him again for saving her son, even though she had thanked him countless times over the years. She told him that not a day went by that she did not think about what he had done for her family. She told him that he had not only saved David's life, but had saved her life and her family's life because losing David would have destroyed them all. She told him that he was a hero not just to David, but to their entire family and to everyone whose lives David had touched and saved in his own career as a police officer. Officer Torres, with tears in his own eyes, told Jennifer that saving David had been the highlight of his career and the moment he was most proud of in all his years of service. He told her that seeing David grow up to become a police officer and save lives himself had been the greatest reward he could have ever received. He told her that the legacy of that Christmas morning would live on through David and through all the lives David would continue to save and touch throughout his career. The story of David's rescue and recovery and his journey to becoming a police officer was eventually written about in newspapers and magazines. Television programs featured the story. The story inspired people across the country and around the world. The story became a symbol of hope and second chances and the power of dedication and service. The story became a reminder that miracles can happen and that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they care enough to never give up. Comment below and share your thoughts. Do you believe in Christmas miracles? Have you ever experienced a moment when you thought all was lost, but then something impossible happened to save the day? The story of David's rescue reminds us that Christmas morning can bring miracles that change lives forever, that communities working together can achieve the impossible, that people dedicated to helping others can make the difference between life and death, that hope and determination and refusal to give up can overcome even the most desperate circumstances. The story of David reminds us that one act of heroism can create a legacy that lasts for generations and touches countless lives in ways we can never fully measure or understand. This is the story of a 6-year-old boy who was lost on Christmas morning in the cold and snow. This is the story of a police officer who had the intuition to search in the right place at the right time when all seemed lost. This is the story of a medical team that saved a child's life by bringing him back from the edge of death with skill and dedication. This is the story of a community that worked together to search for a missing child and never gave up hope. This is the story of what happens when people dedicate themselves to rescue and service and helping others and making a difference. This is the story of how, against all odds and expectations, on Christmas morning, a miracle happened that changed lives forever. This is the story of David's rescue and the legacy of heroism that began on that cold Christmas morning and continues to this day through David's own service as a police officer, saving lives and helping others just as his life was saved. This is a story that shows us the power of heroism and dedication and community, and the fact that Christmas miracles are real and possible when people care enough to make them happen.